Hello. Welcome to the Knowledge Check podcast, a D&D 5th edition discussion podcast. I am one of your hosts, Eric, and welcome to another live episode. I almost jumped into the Ebron Renewed intro of asking you what happened last time. What happened last time, Philip? um, yeah. No, last time uh, my internet exploded and we had to postpone this for a week. Um, so yeah, but we are excited to be back in the saddle once again. Um, so before we get going too far into the show, the obligatory social media plug. I'll take it this time, Philip. Oh, Philip is muted. That's no good. Let me fix that. See if I can remedy that. Go ahead and talk, Philip. Yeah, they can't hear you. Talk again.
Check.
Oh, talk again, Philip.
Oh, are there?
You should be heard now. I think I resolved the issue because
Aha!
I'm amazing.
They declare that I am good.
Okay. So the social media plug. You can find us on Facebook at the Geek Pantheon. We are also on Twitter and Instagram at the Geek Pantheon. We have a Patreon. If you like our shows and would like to see them done just a little bit better, consider hopping over to patreon.com/the Geek Pantheon, where there's lots of awesome tiers where you can contribute to the shows and get some really fun things back in exchange. Just a few nights ago, Philip and I hopped on with some of our patrons and played some Genesis, did Setting Roulette, which was made famous by one of our fellow D20 radio podcasts, the Dice Pool podcast, in which we created our own setting on the fly that involves vampires and cyborgs and cat people and guns and like Borderland-esque guns that are really cool and stuff. So it was a lot of fun. It was a fun night of gaming, and we're going to be doing it again later on this month. So yeah, hop on over to patreon.com/the Geek Pantheon to check out all of the awesome tiers and become a part of our awesome Patreon community. Philip, what news in the D&D world?
Two big things. One, we have now had announced the next adventure book, which will be called Ghosts of Saltmarsh. This is going to be a republication of 5, I think, updated adventures, some of which are old AD&D adventures, some of which are from Dragon Magazine, and they're going to be updated to 5th edition, and all of them are nautical in nature, one presumes based on the other things they've said, and all of them will center around the port town of Swamp Marsh. Nope, Salt Marsh. Swamp Marsh is
would be
just redundant.
Would be old swamp.
Salt Marsh. So that's about half the book, and the other half is like an addendum to the Dungeon Master's Guide for running nautical campaigns. So rules for ships, such as they put out a Unearthed Arcana rules for ships a while ago. So presumably this is going to be the final version of that. Rules for ships, maybe some character options. We don't know, but stuff for if you want to run a pirate campaign or a campaign that takes place all on ships, or if you're playing Eberron and you want to play into Lazar Principalities, then presumably this is the book for you.
Yes.
So, perhaps a little disappointing that the adventures are not original, because I think most DMs are pretty capable of updating adventures on their own. But the nautical stuff, that's cool.
Yeah. I think it's some good resources, things that as some of our patrons, when I was trying to run a game for them, can attest, nautical rules are going to be very helpful for D&D 5e. I was trying to run a pirate session, and it's there's some stuff but not a lot. So Be good to have those rules out there in the universe. Um, one last thing before we hop into the main part of the show. We are proudly part of the D20 Radio Network of podcasts, which have, I'm being told I'm much quieter than Philip, so I will remedy that situation real quick. Um, am I louder?
You are louder.
Too loud, some might say.
No, you're fine. It just surprised me.
I see where you are much louder than me. Let me, I guess I could turn you down rather than turning me up. Anyway, the joys of live recording. So, we are proudly part of the D20 Radio Network of podcasts that feature all sorts of wonderful podcasts, such as the aforementioned Dice Pool podcast, that covers all things Genesis, including doing live plays of the various settings. They've done a Terranoth live play. They did a series of live plays set in their custom setting that they made with Setting Roulette, which was very cool, called Night's Edge, that involves blimp ship battles and werewolves and shadows and all kinds of cool stuff. And they're about to do some live play episodes in the Android setting with the release of Shadow of the Beanstalk, which they just did an episode review, and they're having Sam Stewart, head of all things RPG at Fantasy Flight Games, on their show to answer your questions regarding that expansion. So that's very exciting. So yeah, go check out their show and all the other wonderful shows over at d20radio.com/podcasts. And while you're over there, you can check out the best little gaming blog on the internet with daily articles that go up by writers that are gamers just like you, coming up with fun content for all kinds of systems over at d20radio.com. And we're going to get to see a lot of people, a lot of our listeners at Gamer Nation Con, which is coming up next month. That's exciting. That's D20 Radio's gaming convention down in Plano, Texas. So that will be a lot of fun. Get to play some games and meet some people. So that will be wonderful. So yeah. Anything else, Philip?
No.
Okay.
I want to say.
So let's hop into the main part of our show tonight, which is discussing role-playing in an established IP.
Oh, nope, there is.
Okay, we're going to take it back. Cut.
The Artificer.
Oh, yes. Yes.
The other new thing in the D&D world, Unearthed Arcana released an updated form of the Artificer. It's better.
Yes.
It's not perfect, but it's better.
Getting there.
It has more spells, which it needed. It's got much more of a built-in mechanic for sort of hacking together temporary magical items, which is really cool. It's pretty limited on its subclasses right now. You've still got the Alchemist. They got rid of the shotgun-based subclass and replaced it with a turret-based subclass, which I mean, that's fine. I'm sure I'm not very impressed by that. I think you could do something a little more open-ended, especially since it's an artificer. I think we could do maybe a construct-based subclass that the artillery turret thing is an option.
Yeah.
Since we do have that construct, that clockwork is in it is in the 5e resources. We have a little clockwork that's just a big crossbow, but there's a whole bunch of other little kinds of constructs. And so it would be interesting to have some options for what kind of construct you want to make.
Yeah.
Rather than just this one fixed kind.
Yeah.
So that would be a change I would like to see. But otherwise, it looks a lot better. It's a lot more like Eberron. It fits the setting much better. So I look forward to seeing where they continue to take that.
Yes. Yeah, replacing the shotgun artificer with the turret artificer is like somebody made you a sandwich and they put mayonnaise on it and you said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't like mayonnaise," and they came back with a sandwich with Miracle Whip on it. Like, just it's kind of the same. I don't like guns in my D&D, but it's fine. So yeah, let's get into the main part of the show where we are going to be discussing role playing in established IPs. And in typical fashion, one of our awesome patrons Laura is in chat for our live stream, and she, of course, had to bring up sour cream. So, if you enjoy talking about sour cream, please join our Patreon. um, People apparently have a lot of opinions about that condiment. So yeah, we're going to be discussing things, role playing in things like Star Wars, Middle Earth, Star Trek, um, X-Men,
Doctor Who?
Doctor Who. Philip has a Destiny Genesis hack he's been working on
Forever.
forever. I only mention X-Men because I promised a X-Men in Eberron adventure for this year's Gamer Nation Con, and all of a sudden it's a month away. So, yeah.
Oh, it is. Oh. Oh, it is. Okay, moving on.
So yeah, we're going to be discussing that, and we have a lot of awesome questions from our listeners and patrons that we received over this topic. But I guess start at the beginning. We talk about role playing in an established IP, which obviously involves creating a character in an established IP. And obviously, the two examples we started off with of Star Wars and Middle Earth have established role playing games centered around those. But also, and forgive me, Philip, the development team that did the Middle Earth role playing game.
The current one or the old
current one
is Cubicle 7, and it's called The One Ring.
The One Ring. But they also did source books for D&D 5th edition with Middle Earth, correct?
Oh, yes. They've released Adventures in the 5th edition equivalent of The One Ring.
Yes. So we do have that. And then obviously we can go back to Saga Edition Star Wars for a D20 system with Star Wars. So these two IPs in particular have existed in the in the case of Middle Earth, still do exist in the D20 space. But then also you have things like Star Trek, Firefly. So what tenets do you bring to the table? Well, even before you come to the table, creating a believable character in these established IPs. Like what good thoughts do you have in that regard, Philip? If I'm wanting to make a adventure in Middle Earth, because obviously I can't go to that with the same mindset I would creating an Eberron hero.
Yeah, I think one of the things about RPG systems, like worlds that are built to be an RPG world as opposed to worlds that are built to be a fiction world, is usually an RPG world is made as open as possible as far as the types of person you can be in that world. So, Eberron being the one that you and I favor, you can play a very pulpy Indiana Jones adventure in Eberron. You can play a high political intrigue world in Eberron. You can play epic cosmic threats. You can play a lot of different kinds of fiction with Eberron. And while you could set a pulpy Indiana Jones style dungeon delving adventure in Middle Earth, it would be odd
for certain players. I mean, if you
well, from the perspective of Middle Earth, it would be odd. You could do that, and you could probably have a great deal of fun doing that, which is totally fine. But it would be an odd fit to Tolkien's Middle Earth,
exactly,
which is not a pulpy world. And so that, I think, is the first thing, is that if your group cares about that, and that would be a thing to work out, does your group care about that sort of consistency? Then it probably would behoove you, especially if you have players of mixed familiarity with the setting, it would probably behoove you to set down in your session 0. One really nice tool that you might use would be the setting worksheet out of the Genesis book, in which you sort of set down, here are the tropes of the world, and that kind of thing.
I happen to have
one
right here on my desk.
Indeed. And I don't have one in front of me, so maybe you can tell me more of the things besides tropes that are on it. But the basic, what is the paradigm? What are the paradigms and tropes and that kind of thing of themes of this world that we're in. And that way, everyone kind of has the same expectation of what kind of world this is.
Well, and it asks three very specific questions surrounding tropes slash themes that I think is important to ask if you are kind of building out your setting, even from an established IP of what are you including, what are you
Mm-hmm.
excluding, and what are you subverting? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so what typical Middle Earth tropes do you want to include? What do you want to just completely have not be a part of it? Like, if you're doing a
Mm-hmm.
pulpy, like fast and loose adventure, probably like trips to the Shire may not play into that. Um,
Oh no, you're so wrong. It has to be the Shire. The Shire is the only place where that kind of adventurer who's going to go off on a fun madcap dungeon delving adventure is going to
I'm
come from.
going on an adventure.
Everyone else is too serious.
That's the best moment of the Hobbit trilogy. Is
Boy, isn't it sad to say that?
but it's true. um, um,
Because that's like 30 minutes in.
yeah. we
And it's all downhill from
we
there.
have the line for line recreation of the Gandalf Bilbo conversation, the
Mm-hmm.
dwarves singing in dinner
Yep.
scene. I'm going on an adventure, and then the rest of the trilogy. Then you can just turn it off and go read the book.
Yep.
Anyway, so, and then what things are you subverting? Which I think is
Mm-hmm.
that's my favorite question: is what are we taking and turning on its head?
Mm-hmm.
Like elves being stuck up, like, ooh, the age of men is dumb. That's my best Elrond impression. Um, um, so, yeah, those are really cool questions to ask when you're
Yeah.
preparing to play in slash run a session in an established IP, and making sure you have
So,
buy-in from everybody with those things.
yeah. And so you can take that, and that can kind of guide you in creating the type of character. Now, the nice thing about uh, current options for role playing, in specifically, well, in a lot of places, is that um, many established worlds, uh, many established worlds have role playing games built around them right now, which whether they're using the D20 system or whether they're using their own system, um, they are designed to build characters that will fit there. So the One Ring, if you're playing the One Ring, or if you're playing Adventures in Middle Earth, the character creation is different from D&D. Even though Adventures in Middle Earth uses Fifth Edition as its core, its character classes are not those of D&D. There, you will not find the D&D Fifth Edition wizard
Yeah,
in the Adventures from Middle Earth book. The closest thing you will find is the scholar, and he casts no spells because that would be a fantasy trope that just doesn't exist in Middle Earth, as you don't have the traditional D&D concept of the spell. And so I think that's a big part of before you can build a character is you really need to understand what, from a RPG perspective, are the expectations of this world, and based on that, where does my character fit in? I think to jump to a different setting, Star Wars, I think that's one of the reasons that the Fantasy Flight system has worked so well is because they've released it in 3 different forms.
mm-hmm.
You have the smuggler setting, Edge of the Empire, the rebel soldier setting, Age of Rebellion, and then the Jedi setting, Force and Destiny. And while they're all compatible with each other, and you can have characters from all 3 right together, each book takes on the tone of that sort of section of the Star Wars
Yeah,
world.
Han, Leia, and Luke, respectively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think being intentional um, about um, about making sure that you fit the tone not only of the established setting but also the expectations of the table. Because if the table sits down and we decide we're going to do a pulpy dungeon crawly adventure in Middle Earth, kind of subvert those expectations and everything, and Philip comes back to the table with very much a as Tolkien intended Middle Earth character, that's going to create some dissonance at the table.
Well, I mean, Philip's not coming back to that table, so that's not a problem anyone needs to worry about.
Philip just quits at that point.
Yep.
Um, so, um, yeah. Do you want to take our first listener question, Philip?
Sure.
Since we have a lot, thank you to all of our
We do
wonderful
have a
listeners.
lot.
So, Kevin asked, as a GM, when playing in an established setting, do you prefer to entwine your plot slash PC with the main characters slash plot, even if only loosely, or do something completely unrelated to the main plot slash characters?
Hmm.
This to me is from a campaign slash table to campaign slash table basis. I think some players would really like, if you're playing in Star Wars, to be at the Battle of Hoth. Maybe not like
Hmm.
running right next to Luke or whatever, but like being at those big events.
Hmm.
I think some tables want not like they want to play in the Star Wars universe, but they do not want to play in the trilogy era.
Yeah.
Old Republic, New Republic. Let's go fight some Yuzon Vong. I don't know why you would want to, but um, anyway, that's just a question for your table. Me personally, I I find myself somewhere in the middle. I like the idea of playing during like in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, in between Revenge of the
Hmm.
Sith and A New Hope. The 30-year gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. Those those points where there are touchstones for the players and myself to latch onto without established canon to restrict me too much. Um,
Hmm.
and I also think there's a time and a place to, once again, going back to that word subvert. Um, Chris, GM Chris of Order 66, who we're currently going up against in live streams tonight. So thank you all to you awesome listeners watching our programming. um, he ran a Star Wars campaign way back in the day and did not tell his players that he was going to be doing this. But had Darth Vader die in the first session. Like his TIE fighter got blowed up. And then Luke died. And that kind of established to the players of, oh, we're in the trilogy era, but nope. So that's a cool way to kind of break away from that. So Philip, what do you think though?
At in my Middle Earth games, because that's what I run. My Middle Earth games are we use the One Ring setting. We don't use the Adventures of Middle Earth. Partly because we started before that was published, but also because I think the One Ring does a little bit better job of capturing the Tolkienic fantasy feel. My players pretty frequently are involved with sort of peripheral characters. My characters have never encountered Bilbo. They've heard of Bilbo. One of my characters is a distant relation of his, but so is half the Shire. Uh, but they have, over the course of just started our fourth campaign in the One Ring. We've got in-world 20 years of play under our belt now. They have encountered Bard, the King of Dale, pretty frequently, and done a lot of work for him as a patron. During the first campaign, they worked really heavily for Bjorn, the Skin Changer, and they have occasionally encountered, the Elven King, and so the sort of big political figures who are characters from the books play a role pretty frequently. But in terms of encountering people like Gandalf, Aragorn, that sort of thing, I tend to keep that pretty sparse. It has happened. My players have encountered Gandalf, and they actually have also encountered Aragorn as a young man. But I try to keep that kind of sparse because I feel like it just provides I like that moment where my players figure out who this person is. Like I see them realize it, knowing, of course, that their characters don't know anything about this person, but they enjoy that. But if it's all the time, I think it would become boring.
Yeah.
So I try to use them as little cameos, but not big parts of the plot. Probably the most extensive encounter they've had with a character is during my Rohan campaign. Um, happened to be during a time period in which uh, Aragorn, in another under another name, uh, is traveling around and serving the kings of Rohan and the stewards of Gondor, and he was the captain of a troop of soldiers they went on a mission with for the king of Rohan. And so he was present throughout that, but never quite, always kind of handling something else. Players handled this because that's, I think, the big danger of having the main characters of the story, the main characters of the film or the book that you're playing in around, is that your characters are the main characters
Yeah.
of your campaign. But unless you're going to do what Chris did and just off Vader and Luke, if Luke Skywalker is around, your player characters, unless he's very young, unless they're like on Tatooine and he's 10, your player characters don't compare to Luke. He's mighty and powerful. My player characters are not more competent at anything than Aragorn.
Yeah.
So having them around kind of makes the players can kind of make the players become secondary characters in their own story.
Well, and I think there's a way that you can tweak that concept. Like, for example, take Return of the Jedi, Jabba's barge exploding and them flying off, having won the day. It would be really interesting if part of your Edge of the Empire campaign, your players get a bounty on Jabba the Hutt, and they spend all this time planning and infiltrating, and then all of a sudden this guy in black walks in and starts talking about, and part of their plan was to set charges on Jabba's barge and get him to go out on it, and then it blows up. And your players are agitated because they did all this hard work, but nobody is going to think that they did it. And then what you've done is essentially ruined that scene in the movie for your players, to where anytime they go to watch Return of the Jedi, they're just going to cross their arms and shake their head like, that was us, man. That was us. So
that's pretty funny.
That's a way that you can do it. With these worlds are so big that you can have other things going on even in the periphery of the established story that we know.
Well, and one interesting turn of events in my Middle Earth game, and one of the things that's nice about gigantic worlds like this, where you have, with all of, especially if you include the old extended universe stuff, with all that there is written about Star Wars, with all that there is about Middle Earth, there's so many little things that happened that you could bring your players into without messing with the actual canon story, if you're not comfortable messing with the canon story. So, for example, in my first campaign, one of my players he was playing a Bjorning, and he selected a name out of the list that was Grimbjorn. And so we started playing, and one of the threads that developed in the One Ring setting, Grimbjorn, or Bjorn, the skin changer, has a fosterling. He has a foster daughter, essentially, who lives at his hall after her father was killed, and he takes care of her. And the character Grimbjorn gradually developed a romance with her, and went on a quest to try and win her favor by slaying this horrible beast, the werewolf of Mirkwood. And in the process of killing it, a werewolf in Lord of the Rings is different from a werewolf in other fiction. If you don't know that, I'm not going to pedantically explain how, but it's basically just a big wolf that's possessed by an evil, doesn't change into man form. And in slaying it, the evil spirit comes out of it, and according to the adventure I was using for adapting this scene out of, the evil spirit will lunge at whatever character has the most shadow, which is a thing in One Ring, and that happened to be Grimbjorn. And so he became possessed by the spirit of the werewolf, and there were a whole bunch of checks you had to make to see if you could contain it. And so this led to a set of events where he and Bjorn went up into the mountains and spoke with a very powerful being in the cosmos and Grimbjorn became the new skin changer. And Bjorn left, departed. No one knows where he went. And so Grimbjorn is now the Lord of the Bjornings. Well, in the Council of Elrond, Frodo, talking with one of the dwarves, is informed that Bjorn is no longer there, and the leader of the Bjornings is now Grimbjorn the Old. And so one of the retired characters in my campaign is now a canon character in Lord of the Rings. So that sort of thing, just there's a lot of room in Lord of the Rings for that kind of thing. I really tried to convince one of my players in this game to play Bard's son, the future King of Dale, because we know who's king in Lord of the Rings, and we know there was a king in between, but we don't know what happened to him or anything about adventures. So if he runs out and gets killed as a kid, then, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. So, I try to bring in elements of the story that are sort of peripheral elements of the canon story into my campaign, rather than, my players are not going to be at Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
That's just not, it's not something they would want to do, and it's not something we're going to do. If we keep playing One Ring campaigns, I do eventually intend to play a campaign that is in the War of the Ring, but it'll be set outside of the main events. It'll be the stuff up around Mirkwood or something like that.
Yeah.
So I like to pull in that kind of peripheral stuff rather than just have Gandalf walking around with them.
Yeah. Okay. Darren has our next question. I don't know if I called out. It was Kevin that asked that first one. Thank you, Kevin. Darren, what advice do you have for players who are already familiar with the stories already told in the setting? For example, I'm playing in a Dragonlance game going through the story of Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and I've read the books and watched the movie, so I know what's supposed to happen. Should I just follow the script, or should I try to take the story in a different direction? So you say you're playing in this, Darren, which does add. I don't. As a player, as a DM, I would never want my players to feel restricted by the canonical story. So if you are a player in this game, play your character how you would play your character. Don't constrain yourself to the script. Now, if you're DMing it, that's whatever's your jam. If you want to maintain canon and you think that's something that's important to your players and to your table, that's totally fine. If not, though, if they don't want to be constrained by that, then don't. I mean, you don't owe the people that wrote that story anything. So just do whatever is best for your table and for your game. Kind of like what we were talking about with Chris killing Vader and Luke. That made his game more interesting for both himself and his players. Whereas I'm sure there have been thousands of successful campaigns out there that took place alongside the original trilogy, and not once did they break canon, and everyone had a great time and loved that story too. So anything you'd like to add, Philip, or do you disagree? Or
no, I agree. I think that it's not a matter of I want to protect the canon or I specifically am seeking to break the canon. It's a matter of I'm going to play my character. I'm in events that I'm familiar with, but my character is not, I presume, one of the characters from the book. And so he's got his own motivations and his own baggage that he's going to bring to the table. And so I would try to play my character the way my character would react, regardless of what a different character in the book might have done.
Yeah.
And if the DM wants to, use the power of fate to protect the canon, then that's his prerogative.
Yeah. And Laura kind of had a question along the same vein about how do you feel about changing canon to suit your story? I'm fine with it. Like,
if everyone at the table is cool with that, that's fine with me.
Because that's what to me makes your story your story. There's people out there that would disagree with that, but I'm totally fine with it. And I would not have any hangups about if I was running a Star Wars campaign, especially if it's something due to player action. Like if a player is doing something crazy and they want to steal the plans to the Death Star, and they're in a position where they can do that. I'm not going to say, well, you're not Jin Urso, so you can't. Um, Now, in one of the few Star Wars sessions that I've gotten the chance to run, the party was on Tatooine, and Philip said he wanted to drive out into the desert and find a young, small blonde boy and take him. And I just gave Philip a stern look. So, um, yeah, but I don't have any problems, and I think it's perfectly fine. And I kind of lean in favor of changing canon to suit the story.
I think it's especially important if you're playing through if you're going to play characters involved in the assault on the Death Star or something like that. I feel like because of the way the movies are designed with a strong element of fate and a strong chosen one narrative, I feel like it just sort of makes what your characters are doing potentially irrelevant if you're not gonna make something change. I mean, this is why I would usually play something. I would usually put my characters somewhere on the periphery of that event. But if we're gonna play characters in Rogue Squadron assaulting the Death Star,
Yeah.
then we gotta make some changes.
Well, and Laura did clarify in chat. She meant more deciding something happened differently rather than stopping your players from doing things. That also, I'm fine with. I've done, those of you that listen to Eberron Renewed, I have done that with Eberron. Like, I've been writing my story, and I've just decided, you know what's in the source book doesn't fit. It's different. It fits my narrative. So also, I don't have a problem doing that based on the type of story that I want to tell. And I'm trying to think of a good example from Star Wars or Middle Earth that's not like ground shattering, like Bilbo died at the Battle of the Five Armies. But something less extreme than that. But nothing's popping into my brain hole.
I mean, I could give you something, but it would be some random obscure thing out of the appendices that wouldn't be helpful. I mean, the problem with that, if we were going to try to pick something from Lord of the Rings, the problem is, of course, that Tolkien built Lord of the Rings to be such this very precise sequence of events that it couldn't have happened any other way, sort of thing. So that you start pulling threads there, the whole thing unravels. So
yeah. So
it's got to be okay with that.
Yeah. But yes, I'm fine with intentionally changing canon to suit your story. And I think Philip's the same way.
Okay, Laura would like me to select the vague thing. So, okay. We could change. Okay, I could do this. We could change the fact that High King Gil-galad is killed at the Battle of the Last Alliance of Elves and Men, and is therefore still the Lord of Imladris in the late Third Age when the Lord of the Rings takes place.
You could do that. Great job, Philip.
This is the kind of service that listeners come here.
Yep. Okay. Next question. Joe asks, if you're leading them on a plot line, how do you make the players feel as if they are not being railroaded? So this is more of a general D&D question. Philip, you tackle this question first, and then I've been leading the charge on answering questions.
I think the way that you do it to make it not feel like railroading is you need to present a thing that they need to do in terms of why their characters have got to do this, not why you, the DM, are going to make them do this, but why they must do it. Like there's a time crunch. There's it. You put their loved ones in danger, or the thing they care about is endangered by the thing. And so you basically present it in a way, knowing the characters, that their motivations are going to lead them to do it without you having to sort of build up invisible walls that will prevent them from doing something else.
Yes. You also, I mean, adventure hooks are your best friend. Like,
Mhm.
Just because they don't take the hook the first time doesn't mean in a session or two you can't reskin the hook in a put different bait on the hook and throw it back out into the water.
I've got a hook that I have been presenting in my One Ring campaign for years of playtime and many more years in the world. And one day they're going to take it.
One day.
Just
They're just
one
not going to
day
have anything better to do. They're going to take it.
well, and the thing is, like, I play my Middle Earth campaign very sandboxy as much as possible, and so the thing keeps progressing, and so it keeps getting worse. Yeah. And so one day they're not going to be able to. They're not going to be able to not.
Yeah, and that
it's going to be too bad.
That's a totally valid way to deal with a plot line that the players aren't dealing with. If you are providing them with clues, this isn't to say like you tried to get them to go one time and you're like, well, if they're not going to do the main plot, then the villain's just going to win eventually. Like if you're consistently throwing out clues and hooks and things to try to get them involved in this plot line, allow things to continue to progress to where it's going to be that much more difficult later on, to the point where like you have them get in a fight with some street thugs and you find a note with an address, just like classic pulp intrigue. They don't care about that. They're like, oh, let's go fight some goblins. Okay, so they fight goblins, they go back into the city, and all of a sudden they see like a shady like handoff. We don't care about it. Eventually have like explosions start happening, like a building gets blown up. Start making the hooks not only can like reoccurring but bigger, because the plot line is moving, and but don't have it be in the shadows behind the scenes and all of a sudden the world ends, because that's not fun for anybody. But give them a sense, like, as then you'll have it almost have like a Coen Brothers feeling where all these horrible things keep happening around the players and eventually they're gonna have to address it, by God. So yeah, that's how I would play it. Okay. Jeff. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the question.
Wait, our Jeff?
Yes, our Jeff asks.
He's not a listener.
He's a host. He is a patron.
He can't ask. What? Wait, really?
If a player is unfamiliar with the setting, why do you have to give them such a hard time for not knowing a lot about Star Wars? Man, that question had a twist to it.
It's part of the cultural zeitgeist, man.
I feel like I have backed off a lot when I first met Jeff, and he told me he did not like, he was apathetic. Not that he doesn't like Star Wars, he's just apathetic towards Star Wars. I'm sure I guffawed and like got the vapors a bit and almost fainted, but Jeff played in can we call it a one shot if it's 14 hours?
Did it all at once.
Did it in one go. GM Chris came up to my neck of the woods and ran us through his forgotten arc in Star Wars.
Oh, so good. Yes.
And Jeff did great. If you want to hear that, go check out Order 66 podcast and look for the succession of episodes that say Forgotten. But Jeff did fine not knowing the established canon of Star Wars. And a lot of times that can yield the best results. If you have a player that does not know, and B, does not care about the established canon, that can lead to some really exciting stuff at the table, because you just got a wild card. They don't know.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, finish.
You can't predict what they're going to do, and they have the most freedom and potentially can have the most fun because they're not worried about the fact that dwarves don't act that way in Middle Earth. Well, this dwarf does.
Yeah. Yeah, only one of my players is the same sort of nerd that I am in terms of Middle Earth, and has dug into the deep history of it to the degree that I have, or close to the degree that I have. None of the rest have. Most of the rest read the books, seen the movies, and that's about it. And so I'm constantly playing with things from the lore that most of them don't know are from the lore, and it doesn't mess with
Yeah.
anything. They're playing their characters. They're invested in their characters. They've gotten to know characters from the lore that they maybe vaguely recognize, but none of them none of them knew the name of Bard's wife before she showed up in the story,
Yeah.
right? Uh, I did, but that's because I'm that kind of nerd, and so it doesn't hurt anything. And as you said, it creates a fun sense of you can lead them to something that they're going to get the experience of discovering.
Yeah.
And that's so much more fun. I mean, to put it in a different context from gaming, I teach an elective at my school on Tolkien and Lewis. And the first year that I taught it, I had two people in my class, I think just two people in my class, two young ladies in my class who had never read The Lord of the Rings. And they also had seen the movies, like one of the movies a long time ago, because both of them were born
It's okay, Philip. It's okay.
after the movies started coming out.
Fight through the pain.
Anyway, when Merry rides with the Rohirrim to battle, and he's carried on the back of a horse alongside this mystery rider named Darnhelm, neither of them had any idea that Darnhelm, like they had no idea. And so I got to watch them experience the pulling off the helm and saying, "I am no man."
Yeah.
Entirely fresh, entirely blind to what's going on. And it was much more. And so you get that at the role playing game, at the role playing table, when you have a player who's not, a huge nerd about the setting.
Yeah. And you can also find that with utilizing important NPCs in interesting ways. If you have a table full of players that are not like they've seen Star Wars, they enjoy Star Wars, but they haven't gone deep into the lore or read any like the visual dictionaries, and you're doing a prequel campaign, and they've been contacted to do this job for a senator, and they're like, "Oh, this is the senator's like, oh, please call me Sheev." Like when you reveal the last name, they'll be like, "Oh, do what?" Because his first name's never said in the movies, so that voice might give it away. Do it.
I feel like his voice wasn't that way.
No, it wasn't. But if you're gonna role play as Sheev, the character with the dumbest first name in Star Wars canon, then
oh, now hold on. I feel like that's a strong
they just
statement.
Replace the T with an H in Steve.
I mean, that's true.
I mean, the spelling's different. I know, don't at me, but yeah, it's pronounced Sheev. Which, to be fair, Kylo is just Kyle with an O at the end. Yeah, I was very distraught when I discovered that like half of Star Wars names are just taking one letter and switching it. Bib Fortuna instead of Bob Fortuna.
Really wants Steve Palpatine as a character.
His cousin.
In a Star Wars game now.
My name's Steve. My brother's a real Wang. So anyway.
Sheevan. Ryan suggests Sheevan as his full name.
Sheevan's my father. Call me Sheev. So yes, and a lot of apostrophes, says Liz in chat. Then we had a really mean back and forth in our question channel between JT and Laura dunking on Jeff for a while. And then Liz got us back on track with another question. How do you deal with the intimidation that comes along with running a game for people who are vastly more knowledgeable about the setting of your game? Hashtag imposter syndrome. Hashtag not a fake geek girl. Yeah, that's a legit thing when dealing with these established IPs. Is you want to run a Star Wars game and you have that person at your table who has read all of the expanded universe novels and could tell you every theme that John Williams wrote and every time it occurs in each movie, and when it occurs in Rebels. And yeah, you have that person at your table who's an awesome person to have. You should absolutely use them as a resource, because if they feel valued at the table, they're less likely to give you grief at a table, I feel like. Um, but um, it's tough to respond to the question of how do you deal with the intimidation by saying don't be intimidated. Um, but
just calm down.
No, I mean it's understandable and real, and there are moments when I'm running Eberron Renewed where I know for a fact the thing that I am saying right now, Philip has read that section of the source book multiple times and knows it way better than I do. And those of you that listen to our Eberron Renewed show know that in those moments I stop and say, Philip, is this right? Like, am I getting this correct? Because Philip's a good player. He doesn't like belittle me because I know a little bit less about Eberron than he does, or a lot of bit less. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think you should be intimidated by that fact. I think you should see it as a resource and a good thing because you have people at the table that are going to be that much more invested in your game because they care about the setting.
And I would say if you are feeling that intimidation, there are a few ways to perhaps sort of sidestep the problem until you become more comfortable. One way would be to set your game in a situation that is very much out on the periphery of the main story, tangential to, only tangential to the plot that everyone's familiar with, that sort of thing. If I was dealing with this in Star Wars, this would be if I'm picking that IP, I don't know the Star Wars universe in any kind of encyclopedic way. I feel like I could pretty easily pick up a Fantasy Flight games adventure and run the adventure and change all the planet names. And then no one can say I'm messing anything up.
Yep.
Because I have invented these planets.
Unless you just so happen to have that moment of crossover, like, excuse me, but this planet isn't in this system.
Yeah. Star Wars is that kind of world. It's got the, it can be the sort of alien a week. There's all sorts. There's this gigantic thousands and thousands of species of aliens out there. And there's planets that we've never heard of before in every movie and in every TV series that they do. We get new planets and new cultures. And so this is a Star Wars game in that there's, a galactic empire and the Force and, X-Wings and blasters and all the things that make Star Wars. But this particular location is entirely original to me, the game master. It fits in Star Wars, even if I didn't make up any of the things. I just changed the name and said they're here now.
Yeah.
So I can just change all the names, and then who cares? I mean, you want to go play in Bespin, but you have that guy who's at your table who knows everything there is to know. Mining colony on the cloud. What's it? Bespin? Yeah. It's a cloud giant, right? It's a big cloud star. Nope, planet.
Yeah.
Yep. See, that's
big
me. But you know what? There's no way that's the only cloud giant with a mining facility floating.
Yeah.
And so it's not Bespin. It's Calmonarch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's got a mining colony too. And there's a governor there who's an ex-smuggler, because for real, a gas giant planet is, not some other one can't be governed by an ex-smuggler.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and Ryan's echoing what you're saying in chat, Philip, of his Star Wars GM made up a whole separate sector called the Mosalis cluster, where the laws of space are a bit different. So yeah, just go nuts with it. I would also, we talk so much, and there's so many resources out there for dealing with quote unquote rules lawyers at your table. And this is just, I mean, it's a lore lawyer. Like, you're worried about this person correcting you on lore, just like with a rules lawyer, you're worried about them correcting you on rules. Establishing those expectations at the table about, okay, I'm going to do my best to get what I can right. If there's a question in the moment that I don't know the answer to, I'm going to make a call in that moment. and that's fine. We can address it if something like throws everything off the rails, but otherwise, just this is our world, this is our story set in this universe. But I really like your
Mhm.
ideas of changing the names of planets and everything just to give it that your own flair. Um, so yeah, um, I like it. Um, Callie had a question. um, how do you balance your game when you have players with in-depth encyclopedic knowledge of a franchise and players who are brand new? How do you keep it rich enough for one while not overwhelming the other? And I also joined the Not a Star Wars fan club. Hashtag constitutional law nerd. Hashtag maybe I'm in the wrong Discord. um, Callie, you're not in the wrong
Oh,
Discord.
you're not in the right Discord.
I mean, none of us are constitutional law nerds that I know of. I mean, somebody else in the Discord might be. I'm certainly not, but you are certainly not in the wrong Discord. That is a really good question because we've kind of addressed both sides of it. But you mentioned having that one player that's deep in the lore. Um,
I feel like I have various levels of it. I have a player who's very, very deep in the. I am, and he's lots of appendices. I have a player, our friend Brad, who's read all the books and is really interested in the lore, and he's played most of the Middle Earth video games that are out there that explore that, and he played Lord of the Rings Online with us back in the day, and that explored a lot of the sort of tangential lore as well. And so the um, and then I also have players who did none of those things, who just have the books. Um, and I think you will find, or I have found, they gravitate towards different characters. They gravitate towards characters who have an excuse to know a lot of things or be heavily involved. And there's no reason that a character has to know as much as a person could know. In fact, they almost certainly can't. So I think you'll find that the players will sort of self-regulate that in that they will select different characters. But additionally, when I use peripheral lore characters, when I use characters that some of the players recognize and the others don't, I don't feel like the players who don't recognize the thing lose anything, and I haven't noticed any sort of sense of disappointment. But the players who do know who are in on it, so to speak, do get it really fast. Like when I first, when my characters, so in the first campaign, my characters went out of the area around Mirkwood and into Angmar, which is this horrible area north of Rivendell. And they got cornered and were pretty much doomed. And I kind of thought this was a distinct possibility going in, and so I had built a safety valve into my adventure to get them out. I had the sudden arrival and intervention of an elf on a white horse, just shining with light, and just carves into the enemies, and they flee from him. Two of my players immediately knew that this was Glorfindel, an elf from Rivendell. A player who'd never read the books would never have heard of that person, and anyone who had just read the books maybe once probably doesn't remember him because
showed up,
he's
did one thing,
just
and then left.
yeah, he's just kind of there for a little bit. This is the elf that rescues Frodo and them on the road, and then he helps them back to his camp, where he was encamped with three other elves, two of them twins, and one of them looking very young, a very young elf. And as they talked, this caused my players who were deep in the lore to furrow their brow, because they know Elrond has two twin sons, but who's this weird third one who looks like a young elf who's describing himself as Elrond's son? And it's 3 or 4 bits of conversation in before they realize that they are talking with young Aragorn. And so it was fun because eventually all the players were in, but the speed at which they got there depended on their level of knowledge. And I think that all of them enjoyed that. The players who were in on it, not child, young man, the players who were in on it, you don't take children into Angmar. The players who were in on
For
it
context, for those of you
enjoyed.
listening, Philip's reacting to chat right now in our live stream.
The players who were in on it enjoyed being in on it a few minutes earlier than the others, and the others still enjoyed when they realized it was happening. And then afterwards they were asking questions about it. So
well, and I think
that's in chat. That's fine, Laura. Be happy. I don't mind, but I'm just the fact he's like 18.
Yeah.
In that moment. So
well, and I think one good example to look to for this is not a tabletop RPG, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe does a phenomenal job of dealing with disparate knowledge base amongst their audience. And you should not underestimate how the excitement of somebody else at your table can fuel the excitement of somebody that doesn't know as much as they do. Like it, at the end in the post credit scene of Iron Man 1, sitting in the theater, a lot of people sitting there, as soon as they saw Samuel L. Jackson's back facing away, instantly knew who that was, what was happening, what was going on, and began cheering in the theater. Another large group of people had no idea who this person was or what they were about to say or why they were there. But that excitement was infectious. And so the whole theater is like tense and on the edge of their seat. It's just half the people have no idea why. But they're still excited to be there. And that's fine. That's great. You want that. And so allowing the excitement to bubble up as the players deep in the lore realize it's young Aragorn that they're talking to, and allowing that excitement to infect the other players as they also realize is great. Like that, I think that's a lot more fun than just having a player base of completely knowledgeable people that are going to be like, oh, that's young Aragorn. That's really cool. Having the people at the table is like, who is that? What does that mean? What's going on? I think is also awesome. So yeah.
Another way to something you just said made me think of another issue of how do you deal with divergences in lore if you have a really knowledgeable player at the table. With Middle Earth, and there's no reason to assume this wouldn't also be true of Star Wars. With Middle Earth, with everything that's been published posthumously for Tolkien, and looking at Tolkien's letters, if you dig into that sort of thing at that depth, we discover that Tolkien never really was done with Middle Earth. He was still kind of making adjustments, and the first edition of The Hobbit tells a very different story from the second edition, from the later editions after was published. And so there are published two entirely different versions of how Bilbo got the ring.
Yep.
And since Tolkien concedes that this is all an old history, there are contradictory sources.
Yep.
In the Star Wars films, up to this point, you have the perspective of a tiny, tiny portion of the people involved in these events. Maybe they got it wrong.
Yep.
Maybe Han Solo is an unreliable narrator. I mean, let's be honest. Does any of us really think Han Solo is not an unreliable narrator?
I've actually heard a wonderful fan theory that the Star Wars movies are all from R2-D2's perspective, which is why he's amazing in every scene that he's in. And he has rocket blasters and can destroy droids and hack into systems. He's the best. And all these humans around him are bumbling idiots. Especially
That's
C-3PO.
awesome. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you especially are willing to get the buy-in from your players to treat the established IP as historical account, or not even historical account, just accounts of what happened rather than law of what happened, which is how Tolkien intended Lord of the Rings to be taken, as a mythic history. Um,
Yeah, he wanted it to be carried on by other people. That was how he thought of it.
so also establishing that with your players of Star Wars, like these are, if you're setting it in the quote unquote New Republic era, like between the original trilogy and the Force Awakens, um, have that just be the Hollow News Net's account of what happened, and that gives you a lot more freedom in terms of not only the story but the characters. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and that's how you can eventually hit on a Luke like we see in The Last Jedi, of this jaded old man that says that all the stories that you heard are crap. So yeah. Next question. Um, Not really on topic, from Liz. But any tips for planning a con game when it needs to be written so anyone can jump into the story? How do you judge amount of encounters versus time available? I've only run 2 RPGs at a con and I get so nervous. So I typically try to go with a 3-act structure. Like I try to stick with that, because that typically in my mind gets you to about the 4-hour mark, which is a good length for a con game, and gets you a couple moments for breaks, for bathroom break or what have you. So with that, I try to have one common encounter per act, with the middle one kind of being a smaller encounter. Kick things off hot, end it big, and have just something in the middle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Philip, thoughts?
I, I have never run a planned con game. My only con games have been impromptu and using things like Fate that really encourages impromptu madness. So I don't have a lot of experienced advice to offer here, but yeah, based on the things I've played in, you kind of just need a beginning, middle, and end, each of which you think will take about an hour. Because that fourth hour is for spillover because the players did something random
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
middle.
um, yeah. I think, and Laura also asked any tips for someone running their first con game, so we can kind of bubble this all together. Um,
And then Liz has an addendum to her question
uh,
in the chat.
oh yeah,
How do you like planning sessions? Pen and paper, computer, OneNote sort of thing. I do pen and
I
paper.
do OneNote. Um, it's purely personal preference. Um,
Yeah, the kinesthetic element helps me think.
um, I like the organizational tool set of OneNote, and
Eric's notes are much more organized than mine.
um, which, man, if you would have known us back in college, like anybody uttering that statement would be just laughed out of a room. The fact that I even have notes is a miracle. Um,
Yeah.
so um, no, I think running a con game, it's something that you need to have a plan, but you also need to be incredibly flexible with that plan. Um, Unlike a lot of campaign games that I run, where I'm very much player first, player in the driver's seat. I'm there to throw up obstacles on the road as they're driving. Con game, much more focused. Like,
Hmm.
I don't even. I like to establish what's going on before dice hit the table. Like, you all are here doing this thing for this reason, and now we go. Last year at Gamer Nation Con, I ran a couple of Cohen Brothers esque adventures, and that's how I did it. I gave the exposition setup. Here's where you are at right now, what you are doing, and go. One of them was, you all are in a warehouse. There is a corpse that you're standing around, and people are banging on the door. Go.
I like that one.
Um, so so having that focus and that hook already, like you're hitting the ground running, really helps with establishing that buy-in from your players from the get-go of, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. The last thing you
Mhm.
want in a con game is analysis paralysis. You don't want to give them too many options, or else they will sit there and talk and think and hum and haw, and all of a sudden you're having to rush through your last encounter because you're out of time.
Mhm.
Philip, any more thoughts on running con games?
Uh, no. Fast play systems are good.
Yes. I just think if you also I and this is different from DM to GM to GM to DM. Um, I when running a con game, I have a lot of notes on the encounters. I have all the enemies, all the stats, everything there at my fingertips, ready to go because I don't want to be bogged down flipping through a book. If you can, I would not write down things like what you're going to say to describe a place, the
Mm-hmm.
dialogue of the villain, because I've played in a lot of con games where, and this is going to be a very visual moment for the people joining us on the live stream. Join us on the live stream, where I've been engaged with the DM. They're sitting there looking at me, and then it's time to describe something, and they grab a piece of paper, and all of a sudden they're buried down in the paper reading the paragraph they typed out beforehand of the setting and what the villains are doing right now in this moment, and it breaks the flow of the encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are confident enough and comfortable with having it up here, like, before you go to type out that paragraph, what you want. Like, you want it to be in a forest. You want cultists standing in a circle with a weird rune glowing on the forest floor. You know that that's the scene you want to set. Just go for it. Just start describing it, rather than worried about typing it out so you get every little detail right.
Yeah.
That's just a personal thing for me when it comes to running in a con game that I see happen a lot. So anyway, we are promptly over an hour. And we've gotten through all the questions. Philip, is there anything else you
Huzzah.
would like to talk about in terms of running an established IP? I know we kind of went off the rails there at the end with con games, which is
That's all
awesome
right.
and fine. But any last tips that you have for people running in / playing in an established IP?
I would just say don't ever be afraid to do it. It's really easy to consider it intimidating, but I obviously I can't speak directly for them, but I really firmly believe that the authors and directors and screenwriters who created all of these worlds uh, would love the idea that we get in there and we just mess around with it and play in it.
Yeah.
And there's so much area. You know, you look at the map associated with whatever world you're interested in. Uh, there's so much area off the fringes of those maps.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think a lot of people view it as a daunting task. I view it as making my life easier because there's an established IP there that I can play around in. So
Mhm.
anyway, thank you to those of you that joined us for the live stream and were in chat. It's a lot of fun to see your reactions and comments to what we're saying, and also the distracting side conversations that you have that I get caught up reading and catching up on. But also a huge thank you to everybody that listens to this show and listens to Philip and I talk about role playing and D&D for hours at a time. And yeah, anything else, Philip?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Once again, I am one of your hosts, Eric.
And I'm Philip.
And we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.